All right, so today we're diving into something we all use every single second, but rarely think about, how your memory really works. You know, for the longest time, the popular idea was that our memory is kind of like a filing cabinet. Neat, orderly, a place to just store stuff. But as it turns out, the real story is so much cooler, more active, and way more fascinating. Let's get into it.
So let's just start with this question right here. Is your memory a passive place where you just file away facts, or is it more like a busy, bustling workshop where you're constantly grabbing tools and materials to build things in the moment? That shift from filing cabinet to workshop is the entire journey we're going to take today.
To really get it, we have to rewind the clock a bit and look at the original blueprint. This was the first big scientific model of memory, the one that kind of set the stage for everything else. It came out in 1968, and honestly, it made a lot of sense. It was clean, simple, and it seemed to explain things pretty well.
People thought of it kind of like an information conveyor belt. So stuff from the world around you, sights, sounds, hits your sensory memory for just a flicker of a second. If you pay attention, it hops on to the next belt, into your short-term memory, and from there, if you work on it a bit, it gets filed away into long-term memory. See? A simple, straight line from seeing to storing.
Now, in this original model, short-term memory was the absolute star of the show. It was seen as this temporary holding pen, the mental space where you are consciously juggling whatever you're thinking about right now. You know, like when you're trying to remember a phone number just long enough to type it into your phone. That's supposedly where all that action happened.
And this little holding pen had a very famous and very strict capacity limit. Way back in 1956, a psychologist named George Miller figured out what he called the magic number 7. And what that means is that most of us can only hold about 5 to 9 new things, like numbers or words, in our short-term memory at any given time. That's it. It's actually a pretty tight bottleneck in our mental system.
So, if the space is so limited, how did anything ever make it into permanent storage? Well, the answer they came up with was incredibly simple. Rehearsal. Just repeat it over and over and over again. The more you kept an item circling around in that short-term holding pen, the better the chance it had of getting permanently filed away. Simple repetition was thought to be the one and only key.
But, of course, science is all about kicking the tires on an idea. And as researchers started testing this really neat, simple model, some really puzzling evidence started to pop up. All of a sudden, that clean blueprint didn't quite seem to match reality anymore. It had some serious cracks.
The problems really came down to 2 core assumptions. First, the model was really strict. It said short-term memory was the only possible gateway to long-term storage, no other paths allowed. And second, it claimed that the sheer amount of time you spent rehearsing was the most important thing for making a memory stick. And as it turns out, both of those big ideas were about to get totally upended.
The first major blow came from a patient who was known only as KF. After a motorcycle accident, his short-term memory was basically shot. He could only remember maybe 1 or 2 numbers at a time. Now, according to the rule book, this guy should not have been able to form any new long-term memories. But he could. He was learning things and remembering them just fine. This was a massive problem for the theory. It was like finding a secret door that completely bypassed the main gate.
Then came the second blow. This one aimed at the idea of rehearsal. Researchers started to find that just mindlessly repeating something, well, it wasn't very effective at all. What really, really mattered was the quality of your thinking, how deeply you actually engage with the meaning of the information. This is why just rereading your textbook 100 times is way less effective than actively trying to explain the concepts to a friend. It's not about how long you think, it's about how you think. Okay, so the old blueprint was crumbling. We needed a new one. And in 1974, 2 psychologists, Baddeley and Hitch, came forward with a totally revolutionary idea. They said, hey, let's stop thinking about a passive short-term store and start thinking about an active, dynamic system. And they called it working memory. This is where we make that big leap from the filing cabinet to the mental workbench. They started with this really brilliant question. If your short-term memory is just one single tiny box, what happens when you fill it to the brim? Like, if you're actively trying to remember a long string of numbers, can you still do something else that's complicated, like solve a logic puzzle? According to the old model, the answer should have been a hard no. Your whole system should be jammed.
So they put it to the test. They had people try to remember strings of digits while also doing a reasoning task. And the results were just stunning. Even when people's short-term memory was completely maxed out, they could still think. Yeah, they were a little bit slower, but they could still do it. And that was the proof.
Our short-term memory can't be just one little box. It has to be a more complex system with different parts. So Baddeley and Hitch proposed this new model that's more like a team of specialists working together. You've got the boss, which they called the central executive. And then the boss has two main helpers, the phonological loop, which handles sounds and words, that's basically your inner voice, and the Visuospatial Sketchpad, which handles images and spatial information, that's your inner eye.
Now, this central executive is the real key to the whole operation. And here's the coolest part. It doesn't actually store any information itself. Its job is to be the conductor of your mental orchestra. It directs your attention, it tells you what to focus on, it helps you switch between tasks, and it coordinates what its two helper systems are doing. It's the manager of your mental workbench.
This three-part model was a massive, massive leap forward. It just explained so much more about our day-to-day experience. But, as amazing as it was still missing one last crucial piece of the puzzle.
And that final puzzle was this. Okay, so you have a system for words and a system for pictures, and they're working in parallel. But where does it all get stitched together? How do you combine the sound of a dog barking with the image of the dog running to create one single, seamless experience in your mind? The model needed a place for all that integration to happen.
And so, in the year 2000, Baddeley came back and added the final component, the episodic buffer. The best way to think about this is like a temporary mental movie screen. Its whole job is to pull information from the inner voice, the inner eye, and from your long-term memory and bind it all together into a coherent scene or episode. This is what lets us create the rich, multisensory movie of conscious experience that we live in every moment.
And that brings us to the complete model of working memory that we have today. You've got the central executive on top, playing director. It coordinates its two specialist subsystems for sound and for visuals. And then the episodic buffer is the stage where all comes together, integrating everything into the unified stream of consciousness that you're using to understand me right now.
So we've gone on this whole journey, from a simple linear blueprint to this complex, dynamic workbench. But why does any of this actually matter? Well, because it completely changes how we think about, well, how we think. At the end of the day, here's the fundamental shift. The old idea saw memory as this dusty old warehouse for storing facts. The new idea, the working memory model, shows us that it's an active, conscious workspace. It's the place where you solve problems, where you understand language, where you make decisions. It's not about storage, it's about work. It really is the workbench of your mind. And this incredible story of discovery is far from over. Our models of the mind get better and more detailed every single year. And that leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought, doesn't it? As science keeps exploring, what incredible new tools on your own mental workbench are we going to uncover next? Thanks for tuning in.